Now, the footage that you're looking at is of students at Rose Hill RC Primary School lying on the ground in the classroom on Monday as gunshots are heard in the distance. Now, a teacher can also be heard in the footage telling students to be quiet as the gunmen return fire. Now, this morning we're going to be looking at how this trauma can affect students and what can be done to ensure that these students have a bright future ahead. And so joining me this morning is counseling psychologist at Enrich Life Limited, Mrs. Rhonda Thompson Benjamin. Mrs. Benjamin, good morning. Thank you so much for joining us on Now.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. Now, Mrs. Benjamin, I just want to start by getting your initial thoughts on the video. We would have seen those students lying on the ground. The teacher is telling them, to don't get up, to be quiet, just to be still as we hear the gunshots. One person is firing, another person is returning shots. I mean, what are your initial thoughts on this image that we're seeing?
Mm. Well, I think it's an unfortunate event at the school, but it's a wider depiction of a social issue, which is crime and violence. And it's really sad that our children, the most vulnerable in our society, they have this experience, and now intervention is needed at all levels, not only for the children, but for the staff who are directly and also indirectly involved.
Yeah. Now, Mrs. Benjamin, this may not look like the typical school shooting that we're accustomed to seeing. But I mean, in terms of counseling children who would have gone through something like this, I mean, what sort of counseling do you think that they need?
Well, first of all, I must say that children are very resilient and they have the ability, the capacity to overcome negative experiences. So, not all children would require counseling, but all children would need intervention. So, the entire school may need initial intervention by way of psychological first aid. And this can be done in an individual setting or a group setting where there is reflective listening. So you hear the narrative of the children and help them to begin to process what they've been through. And through that, you can make an assessment. You would identify those children who may not need a greater level of intervention, those who may just need monitoring, and those who are experiencing dysfunction. Those children would need counseling. So, of course, a thorough assessment must be done on the cognitive, emotional, and even spiritual level to understand where the children are at and what intervention is necessary. So, in this case, children would need the tools that would help them to feel safe, not even in the environment, just safe in their lives, and provide them with the tools to feel as though they are in control of their lives again. And for children, what we see is that they have a lot of cognitive distortion because they are prone to make up stories. So any thought that they may have that is not grounded in fact, of course, those must be explored and, of course, help the children to understand the reality of the situation.
Yeah.
And once those children would have met their goals in counseling, termination would happen.
Yeah. Now, you mentioned environment, and I think it's so important because the children have been relocated as it stands now with the possibility of them
Mhm.
returning to school on Monday. But is it going to be some sort of transition period that they need to go back into the classrooms?
Definitely. So they would require the intervention that I would have just stated. Now, when people experience trauma, it's very important that they get the support they need. And I'm happy that I would have seen the Ministry of Education involving the student support services to really help children navigate this experience. Not only children, but the parents, because they might be fearful, they might be wondering if this would happen again, and also they may even be questioning whether the world is safe. So before reintroducing those children to any classroom, because a classroom now may be associated, it might be a trigger for children. So of course, children need to feel a level of safety before they are reintroduced to the classroom.
Yeah. And I'm also wondering as well about the immediate and long-term effects, right? Because I mean, these children might have gone through this, and some people have made the argument that this is not the first time. It appears to be a norm
Mhm.
in that particular area. So what sort of
Yeah.
long-term or immediate effects the children who do suffer trauma, what sort of effects will that have on them?
Well, some of the short term effects may be the inability to concentrate because if your body is in a fight or flight mode, remember that is seen as a threat. And the body may take some time to really adjust to the experience. So they might be unable to concentrate. They may have a reduced problem solving capacity. So parents may say, why are you taking so long to do this particular activity? You've been doing this all the time. But when persons or even children experience trauma, they may have this reduced ability to solve problems. They may have change in appetite. Some children may eat more or eat less. They may experience nightmares and temporary confusion. Some may even experience symptoms of anxiety. They may be fearful, they may feel sad, and they may be easily startled. And, some of the long term effects might be hopelessness, panic attacks, persistent avoidance. So they do not want to associate themselves with anything that reminds them of the trauma, and symptoms that are persistent with post traumatic stress disorder. Yes. So it's also important for us to recognize that there may be delayed responses. So initially, you may see children and they appear to be okay. But after a while, you would see the effects and some of the reactions to the traumatic event. So we need to pay particular attention to these reactions.
Yeah. And how long? I mean, is there any sort of reason we could think, well, okay, this it might take this child 5 months to recover. It might take this child 1 year to recover. Is there a time frame where we can gauge how long it's going to take them to recover from something like this?
Now, because trauma is an individual experience, a timeline cannot be placed. Yes. So some children may just need a few days. So the psychological aid that I would have just mentioned, where they share their experience, that might be all that they might require. Others may need a few months, others may need years. However, with intervention, the process can begin. So we cannot say that it would take 1 day or 10 years, but intervention is necessary and it really aids in the process.
Right. And in terms of, trying to be the parent in this case, two questions. How does the parent get the child to return to the classroom? And then how do you deal with the child who has suffered trauma from something like this? Is it that you look out for certain signs and symptoms? Is it that you're extra supportive at this time? What sort of intervention do the parents need at this point as well?
Yes. So support is extremely necessary at this point. We have to remember that children, they do not have as much experience as we as adults do. So they would need your guidance and your support. Remember, parents, as scary as the situation might be, children learn to regulate their feelings, handle their feelings, manage their feelings through watching you. So if you are scared, if you are fearful, if you are having conversations on the phone with really, really intense details, that may impact the way that your child views school, view their education, and the world in general. So parents need to be regulated. If you need to reach out for support and counseling, we have to be realistic. You may need to do that because many persons would have seen the video and they feel that sense of trauma just from watching the video. So, parents, if you need support, reach out for that support. Help your children to regulate, help them to understand that they are no longer in that space and that they are safe at this point in time. Give them hugs, hear them out. You might be, really fed up hearing the same story over and over, but give them a listening ear and help them to understand that whatever they might be experiencing, you are there to support them. keep them away from social media. You know, we might be tempted to show our children the video over and over. Look, you were here, you were under the desk, and all of that. But we want our children to now to now move on from that trauma or move through the trauma. And we do not want them to be re traumatized.
Yeah.
So we need to inform children of the steps that are being taken for their safety. So, for example, I'm not sure if things would have changed by now. The Ministry of Education, they are having classes online. Let your children know. So, link that to the traumatic event so they can see that the adults in their lives are making the necessary steps to help them and validate their feelings. If they
Yeah.
feel sad, I understand. I would feel sad if I were you.
Yeah.
If they feel upset, if they feel anxious, validate those feelings.
Of course. Now, I'm also wondering as well, would the symptoms and effects of this trauma look different depending on the age? So if this had happened, let's say by a secondary school, would the effects and trauma look different to what the primary school children would be experiencing?
Yes. So our younger children, as I would have mentioned before, they are prone to magical thinking. So they make up stories in their mind about the narratives, and this can cause the effects to look different. So our children at a very young children at a very young age, they may be you may see that they are a bit more fearful, and their inability to articulate well what they're experiencing, it may cause some concerns. The older children, they may be able to tell you, this is how I feel, and you may be in a better position to help them navigate those experiences. But for children, because they may not have all the words to express how they feel, you have to be a little more vigilant to those younger children.
Yeah, and quickly, Mrs. Benjamin, as well, for a 2-year-old, because they are not very, well, old enough, would they also experience that same sort of trauma? Or is it that by the time they're 10, maybe 15 years, that would have been a memory, or even they may not even remember it at all?
Right. So for younger children, I'm happy that we did not have children as young as two in
Yeah,
that environment. But for children, it's just about monitoring because they understand when something is happening in the environment, even though they are young. They may not understand the concept. They may not understand what has happened. But seeing the changes in terms of their reaction with adults, seeing parents or caregivers dysregulated, that may cause them distress, even at a very young age. So again, we as adults need to manage our feelings and of course monitor that child to see if there are any delayed responses.
yeah. And Mrs. Benjamin, finally, for the teachers who would have experienced this, I mean, we heard that teacher in the classroom telling them, duck down, be quiet, don't move. I mean, what sorts of intervention would they need as well as they too return to the classrooms?
Well, the teachers, they should have access to the employee assistance program. They would need that additional psychological support. And if the teachers, they need some time off to really process what they've been through, this should also be provided to them. You know, sometimes we do not understand mental health and what is required. And, you know, we have to put people first. In these situations, what matters is the mental health of the teachers and the students. So, of course, if they need some time to begin to process what has happened, if they are struggling in terms of their reactions, they may need that additional time and support.
Right. Well, Mrs. Benjamin, let me thank you so much for coming and just enlightening us on this conversation. I'm hoping that we wouldn't have to have you back to discuss this again, and we're hoping that those children are safe across the country. So thank you so much for sharing your time.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that was counseling psychologist at Enrich Life Limited, Mrs. Rhonda Thompson Benjamin, just sharing about the effects about that video and what that can have on children at that age and even for older adults.